see you, all of you, in face-to-face manner, but it's still an online event. Currently, we are facing a really global crisis. This is my feeling. And in Ukraine, with a high tension, Russia has just approved an independence of the pro-Russian eastern area of Ukraine, and then there is a new phase and with an opposition with the Western countries, and there are last-minute efforts in this changing situation to avoid a conflict. And in this very tense phase, we have experts from US, China, Japan, and South Korea about diplomacy and security. And then we would like to have this gathering because of our strong intention and willingness. And of course, we would like to see that the Ukraine conflict can be avoided, but we cannot eliminate such a similar possibility of conflict here in Northeast Asia. We have geopolitical contentions heightening here in this area and heightening risk of conflict. We are believing in the possibility of diplomacy, and then we would like to manage local and regional risks to avoid a conflict. But we cannot materialize peace just by wishing for that, and we need to make efforts. And then our efforts for the peace of Northeast Asia are also required, and not only to the government, but also to us, the civil society. And then civil society has an even larger role than the government roles, in my view, because we can go a further step ahead, which is not really possible for the government to face the crisis and the challenges. And we believe in the possibility of the civil society's power. And then with that belief, 3 years ago in 2020, we launched this Asia Peace Conference. Now there is a serious opposition between the US and China, and then we are under the impact of that here in this Northeast Asia. And this area has a lot of spots like Korean Peninsula, East China Sea, and Taiwan. But despite all of that, there is no existing framework to really discuss the peace of this region. So that's the reason why we wanted to make this step ahead as on behalf of civil society. And then we would like to have a forum of 4 countries for the dialogue. That was an initial intention, and we believe that we really initiated a historical dialogue. We have only one goal. It is to avoid the incident and conflict in this region, and to establish peace based on rules. And we would like to make that movement with initiatives taken by the citizens. And the multilateral forum for dialogue for that goal is this Asia Peace Conference that we are holding today and tomorrow. However, these hotspots risks for potential conflict are becoming even more serious due to the contention and tension between US and China, which is growing. So we have to be in a hurry. And today, topic of our discussion is the avoidance of conflict in Northeast Asia, and then how to deal with the Taiwan challenge issue. And then I wished to have a face-to-face meeting to discuss all those topics, and we really would like to have an in-person meeting next year with all of you. However, today we have as many as 40 experts from US, Japan, China, and Korea to discuss these topics. And today, thanks to the cooperation from these experts, and 401 experts from all these 4 countries responded to our survey. So we are going to able to report the findings from that survey report, and we would like to have an active discussion on that. And tomorrow, we will talk about the Taiwan issue, how to avoid the conflict about Taiwan, and how to manage the regional overall security risk, and how to make a path toward the achievement of the peace. And then I really would like to have an understanding from as many people as possible about our initiatives and efforts in this regard. Now we would like to start the 3rd Asia Peace Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to have keynote remarks from 4 countries, Japan, US, China, and South Korea. First of all, from the United States, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Daniel Russell, former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Thank you.
Okay, well, if you'd like me to begin, I will. Thank you, Kudo-san. And thank you in particular for organizing this conference again. And I'm honored to join such good friends and respected colleagues from all four of our countries. Xi Jinping likes to say that the world or the region is experiencing great changes unseen in a century. I'm not sure about that time frame, since this is a century that includes the Pacific War, the Korean War, US-China normalization, the end of the Cold War, and so on. But there's no question that the changes are profound and that they present immense challenges to the four countries represented at the conference. I thought that the Genron survey did a tremendous job of identifying the perceived risks in Northeast Asia and illuminating certain contrasts in threat perception among the four countries. And I know we'll have a chance later to discuss some of the specific security problems, such as Taiwan, North Korea, maritime territorial disputes. The survey also does a good job in highlighting transnational risks, such as extreme weather from climate change, environmental degradation and water shortages, cyber attacks, nuclear proliferation, supply chain vulnerability, macroeconomic risks. It's a long list. But in my view, by far the darkest storm cloud over Northeast Asia today is the security dilemma that the US and China have stumbled into as their relationship decayed from sector-specific competition to full spectrum rivalry. These are now two mutually suspicious and increasingly hostile states. Each country feels it's protecting the status quo and its legitimate rights, but thinks that the other country's behavior is disruptive and unjust. Each state sees its own actions as reactive and defensive, and the other's actions as aggressive and threatening. Each reacts to the other side's military behavior and military capabilities with alarm and believes it has to respond with a show of resolve and superior force as a deterrent. And this syndrome drives the bilateral relationship in a negative spiral as each state's action increases the anxiety of the other. And the actions that each side takes to increase its own security has the effect of pushing the situation closer to a crisis. We've reached a point where just the defense of democracy by the US, the Republic of Korea, and Japan is seen in Beijing as a threat to the security of the Chinese Communist Party, and where the Belt and Road Initiative is seen in Washington and Tokyo and Seoul as a threat to the international rules-based order. But in a healthier environment, wouldn't the focus be on ways that we can reconcile democratic governance principles with one-party systems, or an effort to identify steps that would help Belt and Road projects produce better outcomes? But the negative dynamic between Washington and Beijing also affects attitudes of the general public, as well as the political elites in both countries. And this is something that's evident in Genron and in other polling. And it's something that we should be very worried about, because ordinarily, people to people and cultural connections serve to generate a largely positive view of the other country. And that can serve as a safety net when tensions arise between the two sides over a particular issue. But as public attitudes sour, governments have much less room to maneuver, and politics tends to worsen the security dilemma. And the net effect is that public opinion begins to act as an accelerant to tensions instead of acting as a brake. And to me, this security dilemma is the overarching menace threatening the region. And I think that for three reasons. Number one, it's created a hair trigger environment where an incident can quickly escalate into crisis, and where the lack of trust, the lack of dialogue, combined with populist political pressure to defend the motherland, it means that a crisis could very well lead to conflict despite neither side actually intending that or wanting that. Secondly, the security dilemma has radically increased the risk of conflict over Taiwan. In fact, the Taiwan issue that we're going to be talking about is a classic example of the syndrome I described, where each capital thinks it's just responding to what the other has done with legitimate defensive steps, and that it's the other side that is acting in a threatening way. A third reason, a third category of negative outcomes from this security dilemma is that the range of global problems are only going to get worse because China and the West are unable to fully cooperate. So, high on the list are problems like preventing pandemics or dealing with them, or environmental degradation, or global warming. Problems where we're in danger of crossing a tipping point, a point of no return after which we will be unable to avoid a disaster. And I'd add that there's a subset of this category of problems that stem from the inability of China and the three democracies to cooperate. And that's what I'd call lost opportunity costs. Okay, so for example, think of the loss to our interests when we make it harder, not easier, for students to attend each other's universities, for scientists to collaborate, for industries to move data freely across borders, and to set common standards for digital systems based on the best possible model, not based on keeping another country's products out. So Kudo-san, in terms of your framing question about this conference, what roles and issues should be addressed, I happen to think that the greatest value would be to maintain a focus on the US-China strategic rivalry, to analyze the security dilemma that I've described, with the American and the Chinese participants doing their very best to listen to the other countries, and the Japanese and the Korean participants to offer their thoughts to us on steps that we can take that might help diffuse US-China tensions and remove obstacles to some of the areas where there should be cooperation that countries in the region would like to see. So that's my time, and I give the floor back to Ms. Watanabe.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for our internet connection is not good. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Daniel Russell, for good opening keynote remark. Next, I'd like to have a keynote remark from China. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Jia Jingguo, member of the Standing Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor and to speak here. And it's great to see good old friends again. I think the Asia Peace Conference is a very important mechanism for us to address the issues the region is facing. The security environment in Asia now is probably the worst since the Cold War. You see China-US relations moving from bad to worse. Conflict in the Taiwan Strait is rising. North Korea is resuming missile tests. South China Sea territorial maritime disputes are by no means subsiding. High-tech decoupling is going on. The emergence of two rival military fronts in the region is happening in front of our eyes. One is represented by the US and its regional allies, and the other by China and Russia, and probably other, maybe also other countries. This just to name a few of the challenges that we are facing. Our survey also reflects the problems that we are facing at the moment. If one goes through these regional security challenges, one finds that they are interconnected, and more importantly, the most important dynamic is probably the deterioration of China-US relations. To various extent, this development with China-US relations helps explain why conflict in the Taiwan Strait is rising, why North Korea is resuming its missile tests, why South China Sea remains a hotspot, why the high-tech decoupling is accelerating, not only between the US and China, but also between US allies and China, and why the region finds itself increasingly divided into two military fronts. Hence, the crux of the security challenges the region faces is the deterioration of China-US relations. If one wishes to address the regional security challenges, therefore, one has to find ways to stabilize, if not completely reverse, the trend of deterioration of this relationship. Can we do it? A lot of people would say it's hopeless to stabilize China-US relations, let alone reverse the current trend of deterioration and improve it. Hence, we find arguments on the basis of the Thucydides trap, the ideological struggle, or even the racial or civilizational conflicts. These are people who hold such views there are people who hold such views in both China and the US and also in other countries. However, such doomsday arguments are both deterministic and simplistic. They do not reflect the complicated reality. Despite many ideological or ideational differences and conflicts of interest between China and the US, the two countries are not that different, either in terms of values or in terms of interests, as many people assume nowadays. On values, the US claims it stands for freedom, democracy, rule of law, and equality. China also includes these values into its proclaimed core values. At the level of professed ideas, the two countries are not that different. Of course, in practice, there are many differences because of different national conditions. On interests, before Nixon's visit to China 50 years ago, the two countries did not have much shared interests. At that time, China was excluded from the international system. It was a revolutionary state with a goal to overturn the existing system. Today, China is in. China has developed many huge stakes in the system. As a result, like the US, China is a stakeholder. Consequently, it is in both countries' interests that the world is stable, prosperous, and green. Given all this, it is quite inconceivable that the relationship has deteriorated to such an extent as we see now. Why? I think, first of all, the political leaders are too much intrigued by the Thucydides trap argument. Second, they have exaggerated the ideological differences between China and the US. Third, they have given in too much to domestic political considerations in managing our relationship. And finally, leaders of US allies have given in too much to US demands, especially during the Trump period, rather than relying on the judgment on the basis of their own assessment. What do we need to do? Personally, I think this conference will address this question. For us to do that, I think we probably should take a closer look at the following issues. First, how should we look at US-China policy? The Biden administration may have done many things right. However, its China policy has not worked. Making China a US enemy does not serve the US interests, nor those of the world. Second, how should we view China? It is a more complicated phenomenon than one assumes. In addition to the problems and challenges China may present, should one also see its positive side? We don't see it nowadays in the mainstream media, such as economic development, environmental protection, the progress China has made, anti-corruption, reduction of poverty, and so on and so forth. China has also made greater contributions to the world in international efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, in international peacekeeping, in international developmental assistance, in fighting terrorism, in containing proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. All this probably should also be acknowledged. Third, should we let ideology play a larger role in addressing China-US relations and indeed the world politics? Highlighting ideological differences between China and the US may help rally US allies, may help in domestic politics. The problem is, it does not only turn away China as a partner or potential partner in coping with various regional and global challenges, but also make peaceful coexistence with China far more difficult to attain because, unlike interests, ideology defies rationality and, more importantly, compromise. Both countries, but only through pragmatic management involving compromise on both sides can the two countries find ways to peacefully coexist, to deal with various challenges both face in avoiding confrontation, realizing prosperity, and dealing with various regional and global challenges. Finally, what kind of security arrangement should we develop in Asia? A bifurcated one with China, Russia on one side, US and its allies on the other, or a more inclusive one, including and involving both US and China? Personally, I think the latter one is probably more preferable. But will it be attainable? Should we try to make it happen? These are just some of the issues I wish the conference will address. However, my time is up. There are many other questions I wish the conference would address. However, my time is up. Many thanks for listening and looking forward to great presentations in the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jia. Next, I'd like to have a keynote remark from Korea. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Ang Ho-yeon, former Korean ambassador to the United States.
Well, good morning and good evening. Well, I should begin by thanking Mr. Kudo for organizing this meeting, in the sense that I could meet with so many friends from United States, from Japan, from China, all at the same place. And then Mr. Kudo, he wanted me to speak on 2 points. First, my assessment of security environment in Northeast Asia. Second, what role could we play in order to improve upon the situation? With respect to the first point, that is to say, my assessment of security environment in Northeast Asia, I've been listening to Mr. Russell and Dr. Jia, and they seem to agree on 2 points. First, the tension is very high, and then both of them are concerned about the level of tension. Second, both of them agree at the crux of the tension, of course, there is very difficult relationship between United States and China. So that, in fact, is a common denominator that I found in the presentation by Mr. Russell and Dr. Jia. So I'm afraid I will have to say the same thing, but at the same time, let me just try to put in a wider historical perspective. So in that respect, let me try to make 3 points. My first point is, well, last December, I attended a conference in Virginia, United States, in a very small town called Middleburg. And in one of the sessions there, well, one thing I said was this, which is that I cited President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who said through his famous fireside chat, immediately after the United States entered the Pacific War, and then what he said in that fireside chat was this, which is that we will win the war and we will win the peace that comes after that. And I read it and I could understand about the first part. We will win the war because United States, it just entered into a huge war, Pacific War. But at the same time, it was the second part which attracted my attention. He said, well, let us just think about it. It was December 1941, where the war started for the United States. He didn't have any idea how long it will take. He didn't have any idea how costly the war will be for the United States. But even then, he had the courage and he had a vision to say, we will win the peace that comes after this. And that, in fact, is precisely what the United States did afterwards, which is United States won the war and United States started United Nations system, Bretton Woods system, alliance system in Europe and Asia. All of them together, in fact, contributed to maintaining peace and stability and prosperity for several decades afterwards. After several decades, in 1990s, then United States won another war, which was the Cold War. And the point I made in the session in Middleburg was this, which is that where after World War II, United States efforts to win the war met with resounding success. But how did the United States do after the Cold War? That was the question I raised in the session. After the session, I was approached by one of a very prominent political scientist in the United States. He came to me And then he said, well, I listened to your question. And then what I said myself was, the world went in very different directions after World War II and then the Cold War. After World War II, what happened was there were several major conflicts like blockade of Berlin, the war in Korea, Cuban Missile Crisis, Vietnam War. But after that, where things began to stabilize, which continued until 1990. But after the Cold War, then there was a hope for lasting peace. But after 3 decades, what you find is that in fact is far from what we are experiencing today. These days, we are talking about new Cold War. So in my view, to answer your question, the world went in very different ways up between after World War II and then the Cold War. Well, as a matter of fact, that's precisely what I had in mind. And listening to him, I just said myself, at least he agreed with me, but at the same time, just for the sake of convenience, I will just call it Middelburg hypothesis, in the sense that where it happened in the small town called Middelburg. So that is my first point. My second point would be applying this Middelburg hypothesis to Northeast Asia. Both Mr. Russell and Dr. Jia talked about Northeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula, about Taiwan Strait, and then about South China Sea, and applying this Middelburg hypothesis to these 3 places. Unfortunately, we have to say, things have gone in very wrong direction for the past 30 years. That is my second point. My third point would be applying this Middelburg hypothesis to the Korean Peninsula. In the Korean Peninsula, immediately after the Cold War, then in fact, there was much expectation that finally Cold War could be coming to an end, even on the Korean Peninsula. I, in fact, used to be a young diplomat working on political military issues in Washington, D.C. from 1990 up until 1993. And amazing things were happening between South and North Korea at the time. South and North Korea joined United Nations together in 1991. I have to tell you, Mr. Russell used to work for US mission at the United Nations, and in fact, could be, well, in a sense, providing us with first-hand witness of the historical importance of South and North Korea joining United Nations together in 1991. In the same year, 1991, then there was so many exchanges between South and North Korea. At which level? At the level of prime ministers of South and North Korea. They were meeting so often between the two. So towards the end of that year, 1991, they could sign upon a basic agreement between South and North Korea. And that basic agreement was titled Basic Agreement on Reconciliation, Non-Aggression, and Exchanges between South and North Korea. That was towards the end of 1991. In the following year, then what happened was the two Koreas, South and North Korea, they in fact agreed upon a declaration. The declaration was on non-nuclear Korean Peninsula. And at the same time, we set up 3 committees between South and North Korea to discuss all those issues we agreed upon through the basic agreement. That is to say, Committee on Reconciliation, Committee on Military Issues, Committee on Exchanges. So there was hope, enthusiastic hope, that finally Cold War could be coming to an end on the Korean Peninsula. All of it, in fact, came to screeching halt in March 1993. And then many of you would just remember that, which is North Korea declared to withdraw from NPT, which happened in March 1993. At the time, I said to myself, well, Korea, both South and North Korea, we were at very historical crossroad, and North Korea, unfortunately, took a fatal decision to take it down along a very wrong direction. That's what happened in March 1993. And for the past 30 years, that has continued, basically. Of course, there was the Geneva process. Of course, there was six-party process. But at the same time, it didn't stop North Korea at all from continuing with its march along a very wrong direction, which led to arduous march through which millions of people starved to death, complete, say, disruption of the North Korean economy, and North Korea developing all those missiles, nuclear warheads, chemical weapons, biological weapons, threatening South Korea, but threatening all the countries in the region. So that, in fact, what has been happening on the Korean Peninsula for the past 30 years. Again, very unfortunately, well, in a sense, supporting this Middleburg hypothesis. So my wrap-up would be this, which is that for the past 30 years, as Mr. Russell said, as Dr. Jia said, things have gone in very wrong direction in Northeast Asia. So far, we have been lucky in the sense that, well, the tension has been brewing up, but at the same time, so far, we were lucky to keep that tension from breaking out. So that in fact is what we could maintain for the past 30 years. But at the same time, we cannot just leave it to the luck. That in fact would be my summary of the first point. So let me move on to my second point, which is what role should we be playing? And then with respect to that, let me just try to make 2 points. First point, let us just try to recognize the advantage of something called status quo. Status quo, I'm not saying it in fact has to hold for good. Status quo in fact would change at a certain point, but at the same time, well, it must change in accordance with natural development of relations. If any actor tries to push it through, say, aggression, or tries to push it through coercive means, as North Korea is doing, or as we are experiencing in the eastern part of Ukraine, then they cannot lead to tension and war, and as a matter of fact, huge human cost. So we must recognize the value of status quo. Where Dr. Jia talked about Thucydides' trap, and Thucydides' trap, why does it develop into major conflict? Well, it is because of certain actor wishing to disturb the status quo with use of force, with use of coercion. So one thing we have to remember, all the actors in Northeast Asia have to remember is that let us just try to recognize the value of status quo. My second point would be, let us just try to focus upon something we can do together. That is to say, the importance of collective work. And then I was listening to Mr. Russell, I was listening to Dr. Jia, and then both of them referred to this survey of experts in the region, more than 400 experts in the region. And both of them said, well, of course, all those experts, they talked about, say, geopolitical conflicts, possible geopolitical conflicts in Northeast Asia. But at the same time, they talked about the common problems we face in Northeast Asia, not only Northeast Asia, globally. And then example would be quite many: climate change, pandemic, and I have to add preservation of ocean, especially in the waters, which is in fact frequently used by commercial traffic, that is to say Malacca Straits or South China Sea, or even Yellow Sea between Korea and China. In fact, the degradation of ocean in those areas is happening at alarming speed. So these are common challenges, and we should be working on them together among all the actors in Northeast Asia. But at the same time, in the same category of collective challenge for Northeast Asia, I should be adding North Korean nuclear issue. And then when it comes to North Korean nuclear issue, there are so many things we can do together if all the major actors in Northeast Asia can agree upon implementing the common set of measures. We can make progress. Finally, in the category, that is to say, what binds us together rather than divides us, I should be talking about CSCA, patterned upon CSCE. And I was listening to Mr. Kudo, and then Mr. Kudo said, well, there is high degree of tension in Northeast Asia, but at the same time, there is no collective institution through which we could be resolving those issues. That's what Mr. Kudo said. And I think both Mr. Russell and then Dr. Jia, I think in a sense, they were also referring to that. That is to say, absence of institution, region-wide institution through which we could be trying to, in a sense, promote this region-wide cooperation among all the major actors. So that, in fact, is the reason why this is something we, in fact, have been talking about for a long time, which is CSCA, patterned upon CSCE, that is to say, with security basket, with economic basket, with miscellaneous basket. That, in fact, is something maybe time is ripened that we must be giving more serious thought to CSCA process in Northeast Asia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Finally, from Japan, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ambassador Yuji Miyamoto, former Japanese ambassador to China.
どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for the introduction. Well, we have heard from our three eminent speakers, and at the same time, I was thinking about what is currently happening in Europe. And then in Europe, and the diplomacy and military go ongoing hand in hand all together. And military means used at the maximum for the diplomatic issue solution, and then military power is to be used when it is necessary. That's the intent of the President Vladimir Putin that we can see, and that I think that that is the ultimate stage that we reached of the tension and the conflict. So we need to keep in our mind that then the same thing can potentially happen in Northeast Asia as well. As other speakers already mentioned, this level of tension that we are seeing in Northeast Asia, the biggest reason for that, the biggest cause of that is the worsening of the relation between US and China. And the security issue is really facing squarely Northeast Asia area. And then that's the biggest cause and the reason of the challenge and the tension that we are currently seeing in this Northeast Asia, in my view. In this context, I'd like to discuss 2 points today. Well, you are experts, so you are all discussing the topic with all of that as known assumptions of our discussion. However, this discussion is public. So I believe that there are many general public who are in the audience listening to us. So I would like to deliberately focus on my deliberations. One point I'd like to make is about the confidence and the trust. In Japanese, shinrai, one word, but in English, 2 words, confidence and trust. And to recover the confidence and trust, how important it is the first point I would like to make. That is to say that whether there is a trust-based relationship or not, makes a fundamental difference in terms of ease or difficulty to resolve the issue. In other words, there is a less the trust is, the more the difficult to resolve the conflict and tension. It's a downturn spiral that was mentioned by Ambassador Russell. So this level of trust that we are seeing is lowering currently significantly. So it is immediately and very difficult challenge facing us. And then when there is a lack of trust, then we cannot move forward in terms of any solution to challenges and conflict. That's the weight of the trust importance. It is really obvious, so obvious, so I do not dwell too much on it, but the UN Charter commits us to settle all international disputes by peaceful means, to refrain from the threat or use of force in international relations. That's the commitment under the UN Charter commits. That's the so-called rule-based order in the international community that we speak about. And this UN Charter text is really the very essence of that. And these rules are also included in the US-China communique, in the Japan-China joint statement, and also in the Japan-China Treaty of Peace and Friendship. And so these are international binding rules committed by countries. However, when we look at in the Northeast Asian current situation, even these international basic rules, which say that international disputes need to be settled by peaceful means and not using military means, is exposed to a danger currently in and being threatened in our region of Northeast Asia. So we have to seriously think about that in order to identify the next steps. So in order to achieve any agreement in Northeast Asia, a minimum level of so-called strategic confidence is considered to be required. During the days of Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union achieved this confidence through arms control negotiations. Therefore, based on the nuclear power deterrence, that deterrence function worked well. Currently, US and China and other concerned countries, in these relationships, there is no such strategic confidence. In order to resolve diplomatic issues, also a minimum level of what I call diplomatic trust is required. That's essential. Otherwise, no solution can be possible, because what is written on the paper in the text needs to be committed and abided by. Otherwise, no trust, no confidence is possible. That's really the minimum requirement. So the confidence and trust, how to recover them, how to restore them in order to resolve conflict and crisis need to be seriously addressed. And then for sure, dialogue becomes essential. Well, some say that we don't have a luxury of time to have a dialogue. There are much other things that we have to do in haste. But however, I would like to say that including the sense of a crisis, when we are facing a potential crisis, we do need to have dialogue in order to restore trust and confidence-based relationships. How can we do that restoration? I would say that we need to make ourselves understood by the others, and we have to make a really utmost effort to that end. US, China, they are participants in this forum from these two powers, two big powers, and I'd like to say what is difficult to say. Those major powers and those countries do not listen to what is said by the other countries, and they say that when they say something, they are just automatically understood. That was the case of the Soviet Union back then, during the days of the URSS, and the major powers moved with that logic. I believe that it is in this inertia that we are seeing currently US and China. But those countries need to make an effort to be understood by the others and have identified a way of communication to do so. The second is the integrated approach. Well, we are going to talk about in our discussion today and tomorrow to address the individual challenges and however, and of course, in each individual phase, we have to identify the right approach, but then eventually overall integrated approach and a big picture or overall broad strategies need to be at least amongst related concerned countries and then amongst the experts, there needs to be a consensus about them. That can, otherwise then it will not be led to a next solution. That is to say that all the challenges and issues are related to security issues and then related to economic issues, and they are not only bilateral issues, but regional as well as global issues. So from those perspectives, we need to address in order to identify what are the approaches which should be taken to resolve the situation. That needs to be at least in a consensus and a shared view amongst the experts and the directly concerned countries. Otherwise, the mechanism based on the UN system and then the trust building cannot be possible. So the total approach is required. Of course, each individual country addresses and develops its own national policy, but we need to have an overall integrated perspective, and including about China, South China Sea, East China Sea, and then Korean Peninsula peace issue, and Taiwan issue as well. So in any case, then having a forum such as this one to squarely discuss and addressing these issues, I would like to show my appreciation to all those participants and discussants and speakers who are willing to discuss these issues. Thank you very much.
Keynote remarks. And next, we are going to move on to the special session by inviting all the panelists to join. So please be prepared for the discussion. And those of who your screen is off, please video on. Please make your video on. Thank you very much. And first of all, before getting into the discussion, Mr. Kudo is going to have a brief presentation of the latest joint expert survey on top 10 risk in Northeast Asia, which conducted in 4 countries this month. So Mr. Kudo, please.
ではインターネットでこの
Now, over the internet, there are some people who are listening to this discussion. So about the survey that we conducted, I would like to spend the next 10 minutes explaining that to you. Now, this survey was carried out in Japan, China, the US, and ROK, the experts of security, looking at the security and peace threatening risks in the Asia, what the current situation that was looked at.
So this survey was conducted from January 7th to February 17th over a span of about a month. And so we had 50 responses from Japan and the United States, 70 from China, and 31 from South Korea. So a total of 201 experts who responded to the survey. And the risks were judged on 2 axes. The first, well, each of the items, we first narrowed it down to 25 on the Japan side, and the 25 items, how serious are each of the items in terms of threatening peace in Northeast Asia? So that was the first axis. And the second axis was what's the likelihood of the occurrence of each of the events to become difficulties or impediments in 2022. So each has 4 points, a total of 8 points. So if it's 8 points, means that the crisis has already happened, or it's a very serious crisis is happening. So this is what we have identified with this survey. So please take a look at the chart. As Mr. Russell was saying, this ranking focuses on the US-China conflict. I think the survey shows that there's a lot of attention on that. So within the top 10, we see, well, the number one is deepening of the US-China conflict. And within top 10, there is the conflict in the digital area. And number 3, battle for digital hegemony between the US and China, and economic security and supply chain fragmentation, number 6, and conflict in the Indo-Pacific between China and the Quad and AUKUS, number 10. And also, 2 items relating to Taiwan made the top 10 list, so that's so noteworthy. So number 4, occurrence of accidents in the Taiwan Strait, and in number 9, we have potential for an emergency over Taiwan. So as the Chinese speaker said, there's the worsening of the conflict between US and China that's impacting various sectors, and many experts view that as a big risk. So compared with last year, North Korean nuclear issue was number 1, and 2 pandemic-related items were in the top 10. So this time, North Korea, well, recently they have been launching missiles, and so they came in number 2, but the pandemic has fallen out of the top 10. But for global warming, we see that it's well, many experts still select that in the top 10. So the US-China conflict becoming serious, that is being reflected in this survey. So looking at it from 2 criteria, and you can see the nature of the risk. So the first assessment criteria, so how serious is the risk to peace in this region? That's the first criteria. The second criteria was what is the possibility of occurrence of this actually happening in 2022? So in terms of the seriousness of the peace risk, let's look at that first. So the experts in the 4 countries focus on 4 issues. So the deteriorating US-China conflict, and Taiwan, and North Korea existing as a nuclear state. So they are judging that that is already in the state of crisis management. So they each have 2.9. So compared with others, it's very high. So in the 2.9 point range, what does that mean? Well, 0.3, the 3 points is a situation that raises tensions in the region and requires crisis management. And so it's very close to that level. That is what 2.9 indicates. And of the 4, we focus on the 2 Taiwanese issues that are in here. So why the 2 Taiwanese items enter the list? Well, let's look at it by country. So the Taiwan emergency and the accident in the Taiwan Strait. Well, out of the 25 items, so Japan placed them number 1 and number 2. US placed Taiwan emergency, placed it as number 1 peace risk. And China, concerning this Taiwan issue, of course, looks at it as a big risk. And then there is the US-China conflict issue. So that's number 1. So number 2, number 3 are the Taiwan emergency and accidents in the Taiwan Strait. That's China's view. And so what fell to 4 or 5? Well, Korea. In the case of Korea, the experts there looked at the US-China conflict impacting the economy and other areas. So they focus on that, but they're not ignoring the Taiwan emergency. And so when you average that all out, the Taiwanese issue come in number 4 and number 6. So Japan and US and China look at the Taiwan emergency issue and the Taiwan accident very seriously. They're very concerned and worried about it. So that is what is indicated in this survey. So this Taiwan issue, the emergency and the accident, in the total ranking, why does it not become number one? Actually, the two Taiwanese issues, well, the possibility of it occurring in 2022, that is actually rated lower. So there is the Communist conference in China and midterm elections in US. And so in 2022, whether it will appear as a serious crisis, well, Japan places importance on this, but in Japan, US, and Korea, they see this as not likely to happen in 2022, but the US is an exception. The crisis that is most likely to occur in 2022 is the accident in the Taiwan Strait from the US experts' point of view. And so that is why we have this kind of ranking. So the US-China conflict, that is impacting all aspects, including economic issues, but the experts view the Taiwan issue as very important, that it's close to a crisis management issue, but there are different views on whether it might happen this year or not. So another thing we see, the view behind this conflict, and you can see this in the survey result, US, Japan, Korea, so US and its allies look at the Chinese military action and the increasing impact in Asia. So they focus on that as the reasons, and they make decisions based on that. And the Chinese experts conversely look at the US and allies, Japan, especially the increase in military power of Japan. They're cautious about that. And so Quad, US, Japan, response to China is drawing response from China. So there's various other ways that we can analyze this. So the report will be made available on the website. So we hope you'll take a look at it. And so this is the one of the materials for this year's Asia Peace Conference. So please take a look.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Now I'd like to open the discussion session, and I will ask Dr. Sawyer to moderate the session. But in the beginning, we'd like to have a comment from Dr. Zhang and Dr. Choi and Admiral Koda for 8 to 10 minutes. And later we are going to the free discussion, and each person has 3 minutes only. So first 3 people have 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to have a comment from Admiral Koda. Koda-san, よろしくお願いします。
Koda speaking. First, I would like to express my appreciation to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Now, we are going to discuss security in Northeast Asia, the avoiding conflict and handling the Taiwan problem. Now, that's the theme, but now what's occurring in Europe is something that I may have to refer to. And naturally, the situation here in Asia, well, this is my prelude to what's occurring in Asia. Let me be brief. The crux of the matter of what's occurring in Europe. Of course, you can look at it from various angles, but President Putin has set the non-expansion of NATO, particularly the participating in NATO by Ukraine. He can't budge. He has no intention to make any compromise on this point. And supporting that is the military power. And so, on the other hand, NATO, with the way diplomacy is conducted, NATO is discussing things with President Putin. So it's on a different playing field. The American football and soccer are trying to reach a middle point with each other. Probably I don't think there can be an agreement between the two sides. What is most important is there's no intention for compromise. The pursuit to the goal. So how are you going to deal with such a counterpart? How can you really pursue diplomacy without any force? I think we'll see an answer in a few days, but that's what's happening over the last few months. Why do I say this? Well, something similar could happen in this part of the world. And the mission that is given to us is the situation that's been changing over the last year, and how do we assess it? As Mr. Kudo said, apart from the assessment of the results of the questionnaire, but looking at it objectively in 2019, 2020, were the starting point. Hong Kong, Uyghur, with respect to humanitarian issues, still there's a very strong condemnation from the international community, but China says it's an national issue. They condemn the international community for intervening in the national issue, and so it's going to be China might be on a stronger stance, but with respect to the maritime issue, from the end of the Trump administration, the U.S. is clearly showing its stance. So from 2018 to 2019, what has changed? There's not much change in a dramatic sense, but China has been building its status quo, the fait accompli. But when it comes to the use of the maritime scene, I don't think it's going to be resolved very easily. With respect to East China Sea issue, there's mainly the Senkaku Island issue for Japan. The Japan Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard are vying with each other, confronting with each other. There's not much change about this as well. About Southeast Asia, South China Sea, let me say one point. Indonesia this year, I think from the second half of 2020, the issue is occurring. What is it? Well, Indonesia before in the South China Sea, when it comes to territorial issue, Indonesia was non-claimant. However, the Chinese stance about EEZ meant that militaristically or in terms of security, risky situation is occurring in Natuna Islands. So major power in the region, Indonesia, is now coming into the scene. As for Taiwanese issue last year, well, is it a Taiwan issue or US-China issue? But to me, the Taiwan issue and the US-China issue share the same root. The European countries, the members of NATO, they look at the aggressive stance of China, before the Europeans are looking at it, that's a business on the other side of the strait. They were concerned, but they didn't say not much, particularly the UK, France, and others. But they are now questioning this issue more strongly these days. And also in Japan, this is not much well reported, but Nepal, Bhutan, and the border between China and India cannot be neglected. Another point is North Korea issue well, last year, in 1 year, I think that was a major issue. Another, contentious issue in the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. This was a one-shot issue in a way, but well, for us, negative way to look at it is with respect to the U.S. Diplomatic efforts. The many countries in the world now have a big question mark around Afghanistan. The 20 years, the Afghanistan, for the U.S., America is now freed from a major burden. But how that's affecting other countries is one issue. So that's my bird's eye view of what happened in 2021. But over longer term, in 2008, Georgia, the Russian invasion into Georgia, what happened in China, what happened in Asia, Senkaku Island issue occurred. I don't say, it's a one-to-one issue, but what occurred in Asia in 2014, 2015, South China Sea, the landfill issue by China. And in 2020s, come 2020s, Ukraine and Taiwan are now becoming a major issue, have been shown up as an issue. So the US, for the United States, they can't really focus on one issue. Say, if you look at the Secretary of State is traveling around the world. I don't think he can think about policies calmly in such a situation. So my sympathy to him. Now, when you look at all these issues, Mr. Kudo said among all these, well, simply put, Taiwan, North Korea, South China issue, East China issue, and the border between China and India, maybe issues concerning the security in Asia. Well, I don't have any objection to that, but the issue is then comprehensively, there's no arena to discuss this for mutual confidence. Not, it's not going forward, but everything is now being ruined. So how can we bring it back to a more desirable state? That's an issue that we have to tackle. And lastly, let me discuss another point. As an ally of the United States, what should we do in Japan? Well, as some people say Japan, Mr. Trump's policy toward China and India. Some people say Japan was blindingly hugging the U.S. Well, probably, to me, the self-defense forces, as someone who used to be with it, I was involved in the policy making. But I don't think Japan is hugging. Well, externally, Japan may look like it, but Japan's interest and the U.S. interest converge. When that happens, then perhaps 60% out of 100% we take the same steps. But for the other 40%, Japan and the U.S. stance are different. Well, so vis-a-vis China too, there are differences between Japan and the U.S. And that is something I would like to draw your attention to. But when there's a convergence of interest between Japan and the U.S., if they make the same steps, that would, of course, happen. And lastly, what is most concerning? Well, if you look at it very, very differently, we have Mr. Russell, and let me say this.
The division of the U.S. Is the biggest concern for an ally country. That is to say, China, with the one-party ruling regime, when such a country is absolutely determined to achieve a goal. On the other hand, U.S. and Japan, South Korea, or Caucasus, we are in a team, and the leader of those teams is the U.S. And if the domestic situation of the U.S. is confused, the team cannot work in a united way. Rather than Mr. Xi Jinping regarding Mr. Xi Jinping as a former SDF admiral, my biggest concern is to see a lack of an united and then a concurred policy on the part of these alliance team regarding the Indo-Pacific region.
And next from China, I'd like to have a comment and thought from Dr. Zhang.長田生さんお願いいたします。
Mr. Zhang, Dr. Zhang Chosen,
Can you hear me?
please.
Yesterday,
Yes.
I saw the results of the survey on the top 10 security risks that threaten peace in Northeast Asia, where opinions vary from country to country. The combined results are still valuable and provide a more complete picture of regional security risks. Let me make a few brief observations about the survey and its findings. First, I think this survey is very meaningful. The fundamental goal of the Asia Peace Forum is to maintain peace in Asia, especially in Northeast Asia. In order to maintain peace, we must first find out and recognize the main security risks in the region, and then we can find effective ways to manage and solve these security risks appropriately, so as to maintain and promote regional peace and stability. The results of this investigation provide important support for our 2 sessions of closed-door discussions tomorrow, as we seek ways to manage risks and keep the peace. In addition, I believe that the findings are of some reference significance for governments of 4 countries to jointly cope with regional security risks and safeguard regional peace. Second, this survey on regional security risks is rich in content, involving 3 levels: risks ranking, risk ranking basis, and the possibility of risk occurrence. The overall ratings of the 4 countries and the different ratings of each country are obtained. It is significant to find a common denominator in the national findings that speaks to our common security concerns. It is also interesting to see the differences which reflect different perspectives on certain country concerns and how the deep differences that exist among some countries, which may be more worthy of attention and efforts by the 4 countries to resolve. Third, from the overall ratings of the survey, experts from various countries identified the top 10 risks that could have a profound impact on regional peace. I think this overall assessment is quite realistic. However, looking at the ratings of different countries, there are some and even very big differences in the ranking of the top 10 risks and their assessment of the impact of various risks on peace. According to overall ratings, the intensification of the Sino-US competition is listed as the biggest risk, which I think is correct. In addition, the Taiwan Straits, the DPRK nuclear issue, and the normalization of cyber attacks are also top security risks that experts from the 4 countries are highly concerned about. It is worth noting that while the US and Japan regard China's military development as a major risk, South Korea, a US ally, ranks it out of the top 10 risks. China, on the other hand, is most concerned about Japan's sustained increase in military spending, while ROK is also concerned. Fourth, according to the 5th and 6th tables of the released overall survey results, the severity of the top 10 risks that may have an impact on the regional peace in 2022 and the possibility of occurrence are all in the middle region. Because their scores have not reached 3, let alone 4, it shows that the security risk is still basically controllable, and the probability of its occurrence is not very high. It's much better than I had expected. In my opinion, such a result sends at least 2 messages. First, it expresses the expectation of most experts for peace. Second, they expressed their confidence that although regional risks have been increasing in recent years and deserve great vigilance, however, many security risks could be avoided or better managed with concerted efforts of relevant countries. Fifth, in comparison, Japan's security results were the gloomiest, followed by the United States. The survey results of China and South Korea is different to some extent from them. It is also of great significance to find out that the governments and think tanks of relevant countries should carry out active dialogues and exchanges in this regard and try to gradually reduce the gap in their perception of the security environment in Northeast Asia. Sixth, finally, the survey results show that security risks come from both traditional and non-traditional security fields, and some come from a combination of the two. To maintain peace in Asia, we need to attach great importance to both risks and work hard to find solutions and manage them. In addition, it should be noted that countries often have major common interests in the field of non-traditional security. Strengthening cooperation and jointly formulating necessary new laws and regulations and the codes of conduct should be an important way for us to deal with non-traditional security risks. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lastly, I'd like to have a comment and thought from Dr. Choi Khan of Asan Institute.
It is my great pleasure to join you this year again. So I took part in 2020 Asia Peace Conference. It's been a while, but actually I'm very much delighted to join this conference as a local chapter of APC. I'd like to thank President Kudo, and also I'd like to say hello to all the longtime friends, and also I wish the best of my wishes to them. And actually, my observation of this survey result comes this. Actually, first one, there are two main factors which actually create uncertainty or instability in the region. One, rise of China. Second is North Korea, because actually almost top 10 risks, 8 out of 10 are related to China issue, and 2 remaining are related to North Korea. That's my first observation. Second, the area of concern is expanding from traditional security field to non-traditional security field, and also especially in the emerging technology area. And third observation, geopolitics has returned again. When you look at the survey data, Taiwan Strait issue and all the territorial dispute are related to this more geopolitical contention between the United States and China. But actually, to a certain degree, I think the impact of North Korean nuclear and missile is much greater than US-China rivalry at the moment. Because actually it seems to me that because of interconnectedness between the two parties or interdependence between the United States and China, it is very unlikely for China and the United States go to the real confrontation. But on the other hand, they may be dragged into the confrontation of a Taiwan Strait issues or other territorial dispute in South China Sea or East China Sea. But the other observation, I think these are the result on, especially on China, is the outcome of what we have seen in the past whole year. For example, I don't remember exact number of the Chinese intrusion into Taiwanese air defense identification zone. I think that's a number has increased tremendously in recent months, and also the size, number of aircraft has also increased. So actually that raises a concern about what China will do in the coming years and days, and whether China is pursuing peaceful resolution of dispute. That's the concern we have. The other one I'd like to share with you, okay, actually, unlike the Cold War era, the value actually has become one of the main driver in US-China relations. So I think that's why actually the President Biden argued for the values as a core, the element in US foreign policy in dealing with global affairs. So actually that is the kinds of reaction to what happened in Hong Kong, Xinjiang. That's actually that, and also in relation to that, there are many countries are joining in defending the values, freedom, democracy, and human rights. So not only the regional countries, but also off-region countries are trying to join this coalition of democracy and values. That's the observation I can make. So you have a chance to look at the survey data, but actually I like to share my thought with you, especially on North Korea, because it seems to me that North Korean nuclear and missile issue is becoming much more serious. As you can see, North Korea staged 7 missile tests, 11 missiles this January alone. That's the largest number in their history. And also they have developed hypersonic glide vehicle. Only 3 countries have been able to acquire them, US, China, and Russia. And North Korea is the next one. And also North Korea staged intermediate range missile tests. That actually goes beyond the Northeast Asia. So that is very much a destabilizing factor. But the reason we tend to underestimate North Korea's nuclear and missile, because it's been with us for almost 3 decades. So it's like a fish in a slowly boiling water. But we have become much more we have become much less sensitive toward that issue. But actually North Korea's threats are ever increasing, never stopped. So North Korean threat to peace and security on the Korean Peninsula in the region has been increasing. It has never stopped to advance its nuclear and missile capability. So I think that's about a year ago, Chairman Kim Jong-un pledged to further strengthen nuclear war deterrent while doing that it's best to build up the most powerful military strengths. So he actually outlined 5 tasks: development tactical nuclear weapon, production of super large nuclear warhead, development HGV, development of sea land-based solid fuel propellant, ICBM, and development of nuclear powered submarine. All of them will be destabilizing the security and peace in the region. Although we hope for the denuclearization of North Korea, it seems that North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons and missile capability. So most people are quite skeptical about the possibility of the denuclearization of North Korea. For example, according to a joint study conducted by our institute and RAND Corporation, by 2027, North Korea will be able to have about 242 nuclear weapons. That is much, much larger than what they call deterrent capability. North Korea can employ these nuclear weapons for more offensive purpose as well as the political purposes as well. North Korea will try to make a deal with the United States through nuclear blackmail and be able to control South Korea. Since North Korea will not abandon its nuclear weapon, South Korea's survival can only be guaranteed when South Korea is prepared for it. Like a mutual assured destruction during the Cold War era, we should respond to nuclear North Korea by achieving balance of terror. Unfortunately, I have to tell you that. The North Korean regime has continuously declaimed that the hostile policy of South Korea and the United States is the biggest obstacle to peace on the Korean Peninsula. And the denuclearization can only be achieved when it is removed first. What does North Korea mean by the hostile policy of South Korea and the United States? The withdrawal of US hostile policy toward the regime means the withdrawal of US forces from South Korea and decoupling. So I think, but since the very existence of free and prosperous South Korea is the political threat to Kim's regime, in order to stabilize his system of one-man rule, it is necessary for Kim Jong-un to remove such a threat through the unification of Korea under the communist flag. However, biggest obstacle to achieving this is the ROK-US alliance and US forces in South Korea. The Kim Jong-un calls for the removal of this hostile policy because he believes his ultimate objective of unifying the Korean Peninsula under communism can be achieved as soon as the US troops are withdrawn from Peninsula, as in Vietnam and Afghanistan. Actually, I'm very much concerned about the US policy, a debate in the United States about no first use doctrine. It can be misinterpreted by other powers. So we, instead of talking about no first use, I think that we should think about how we are going to strengthen our deterrent posture toward North Korea. So I think there are many things we have to do. First of all, we have to normalize our joint military exercise. And also, because actually I will submit my paper later. So, but actually we have to think about not only diplomatic solution to stabilize security situation, but also what kinds of deterrent measures or military measures we have to take to stabilize the relations in the region is very critical. And also for that reason, I think maybe we have to have more dialogue among the experts on this issue to eliminate, at least to reduce misunderstanding, the measures we can take to prevent further misinterpretation by the other side. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we are getting into the discussion by inviting all panelists. Those who are attending this conference, please join our conversation and make your video on. And now I'd like to ask Dr. Sawyer to moderate the session.
Well, should I do this in English because most of the audience, I think, understands English rather than Japanese. And maybe Koda-san may also speak in English. I just overheard your conversation. Well, Dr. Frank Januzzi unfortunately could not join us today, so there was no US presentation in this particular session. But if anyone from the US side would like to say a few words, I think we should give a few minutes to the US side. If not, Dr. Chega, are you from the US?
No, actually, I have a question to Dan Ambassador Russell, because actually
okay.
I wonder what's going on.
Is Mr. Russell on? Okay, yeah, okay.
I want to have Ambassador Russell's understanding of the discussion of no first use debate in the United States. So that will have a great impact on our future very much. So that's why I'm wondering what's going on in the United States about no first use doctrine.
Well, Ambassador Russell, if you're willing to include this point in your remark, we would appreciate it. Yeah.
Great. Well, Professor Soya, thanks. It's wonderful to see you. And I already had a chance to speak at some length earlier, so I will be modest in my comments. I listened with great interest, frankly, to the three presenters, Zhang Tusheng, Admiral Koda, and Professor Jay. With respect to no first use, I'm not an arms control expert. I think the essence of the issue is whether circumstances in the world have changed such that the United States should signal that it is prepared to contemplate the use of nuclear weapons as, in the first instance, a form of retaliation for a non-nuclear conventional attack, or even more extreme in the scenario in which the US chooses to take some preventative or preemptive action. I know there is debates among the kind of nuclear cognoscenti, but I wouldn't describe this as a front burner issue broadly in policy circles in the United States. The real issue is not no first use per se. It is, as Professor Che implied, deterrence. And there are many elements that go into deterrence, of which nuclear weapons and a nuclear capability is only one. But on the subject of nuclear weapons, I have to say, I think that Professor Che's focus on the North Korean nuclear threat is very useful, particularly the warning against gradually allowing ourselves to become desensitized to the growth of the threat. There is a tendency to ignore it when we're not in the middle of fire and fury. And it is a very concrete example of a problem where the only hope, frankly, of halting North Korea's active pursuit of an ever stronger nuclear weapons capability, let alone rolling it back, let alone denuclearizing North Korea, would be if the United States and China, along with Japan and South Korea, and of course Russia, were prepared to seriously work together. But in the first instance, the US-China connection is absolutely critical, and as several speakers have pointed out, that there's no hope for that. I will make just two very quick other points, if I may. I realize I'm promised to be short and went long. I think there's a distinction to be made between the kind of structural risks in issue like North Korea or Taiwan for that matter, and the tactical risk or the risk of an incident sparked by an accident perhaps that becomes a crisis, which becomes a military clash. And there are different solutions to different categories of risk. And I think we ought to be mindful of that distinction as we look for ways forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm still thinking whether I should control the agenda or collect remarks from the participants. Maybe the latter is better. So if 2 or 3 people would like to say something, I think we'd like to hear that first. And then I will play the role of a moderator. Anybody? Any point that you want to raise in the discussion? If not, do I see anyone? Yeah, please speak up if you, I cannot see all of you at once. So if not, okay.
Okay, what about Ambassador An to make your comment?
Oh, okay. I see this.
Well, as a matter of fact, there are 2 more participants who wanted to take the floor. Mr. Teng Jiak Chin.
Okay, sorry, I missed it. So yeah, I look.
Jobo, and then I already spoke, had an opportunity to speak. So I think I better defer to Mr. Teng Jiak Chin and then Mr. Jobo. And then I will take the floor after those 2 gentlemen. How about that?
Okay, thank you very much. Then Mr. Jobo, is that, do I see your hand? Or Mr. Ten, yeah, Ten Jian Chuan. Yes, please. Yeah, your microphone is muted.
I'm sorry,
Mr. Ten, your microphone is okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you all the sponsors of this conference. It's really a very important occasion for us to discuss the situation we are facing now. As Professor Russell just mentioned, we are facing a dilemma, a security dilemma in this region. And I'd like to give a quick follow-up about the root cause for such a dilemma, not only in security, but also in economic cooperation and other cooperations. For example, the dispute or the tension across Taiwan Strait. This is actually a result of the so-called strategic competition initiated by Trump's administration between China and the United States. So I think we should find the root cause for such a challenge, such a tension. To my understanding, this is actually a result of the rebalancing between the 2 major powers in this region. I mean, between China and the United States. The old balance of power in Asia-Pacific region has been changed or is being changed at this moment. So the countries concerned are now constructing a new balance of power at this moment. So I think we should find a new mentality or way out of such a security dilemma. This is my point. And I think the United States and China should sit down to find some common grounds to cooperate, to go ahead, not only to have a competition in trade, in security, and in some other areas, including the value of the democracy in this region. This is actually only way for the major powers. To my understanding, it's not only for China and the United States, also for Japan and ROK and the ASEAN countries to think about the process of constructing new balance of power in this region? Thank you.
Thank you. One related question, point to this question is, maybe later some people from the China side may want to talk about it. Someone talked about the importance of the concept of status quo. And my question is simple. Can status quo be a sort of point of discussions, diplomatic deals between the US and China? Definitions of status quo could be different, but very generally speaking, is it going to be a so-called mid to medium-term solution over this very difficult issue? So I'd like to raise this question as well regarding Taiwan issue between US and China. And who has raised? Yes, Professor Zhou.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. With the announcement of President Putin this morning about the new, about his recognition of the two republics in Donbas region, I believe whether it's all right for me to argue that we have officially started the new Cold War, because no one would announce the new Cold War. But I think it has started. Even before that, I would say that it has already started. If we look at Americans' Indo-Pacific strategy, in which it identifies the only area of cooperation with China is climate change and non-proliferation. I compare this with the Cold War area. During the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union also had cooperation in two areas. One is smallpox, another is outer space issue. So if we now today, China and the United States only have two areas of cooperation, it's just like a Cold War. And now we actually have two Cold Wars, one in Europe, which is focused on sphere of influence. The other is on the Indo-Pacific. So the whole situation has changed. Then, to what extent does this Ukraine crisis might change the international order? I would say that if we compare Europe and the Indo-Pacific, there is a fundamental difference. The Russians would look at the world from the past, that is the sphere of influence. And of course, there is good reason why Russia feels frustrated. So when we talk about sovereignty of Ukraine, we have to also consider what our foreign minister said, legitimate concern of Russia. But let me come back to Indo-Pacific. In the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States, it claimed that China would pursue spheres of influence in the Indo-Pacific. This is absolutely wrong. Why? Let me tell you. Even if China wants, China cannot do it. In East Asia, look at this. In East Asia, DPRK won't listen to China. And in Southeast Asia, we have this dispute with quite a few claimants in ASEAN. And a few countries are American allies. So even if in East Asia, which is normally traditional and historically considered to be China's spheres of influence, it's not true. And if we come to the larger area of Indo-Pacific, how can China make Indo-Pacific China's spheres of influence with only one logistics supply station in Djibouti? So American strategic thinking is wrong, just like it is found in Vietnam War, in Afghan War. So this kind of misperception about China is misleading, and it is dangerous. But now, what I would argue is the situation now between China and the US is more dangerous than during the Cold War. Why is that? Because during the Cold War, there is a clearly demarcated spheres of influence as represented by the Berlin Wall. But in Asia, in South China Sea, in Taiwan Strait, there is no such spheres of influence demarcated. And there isn't even buffer zone. American ships and aircraft will come regularly to these areas while they want Chinese to make sure they are safe. But such kind of American security it at the China's security cost. So that is a fundamental problem that has dogged us in the last decades. I don't know how to resolve this, but let me come to this no first use issue. I believe time has come for China and the US to talk about strategic stability. This is already mentioned during President Biden and President Xi's meeting, talking about strategic stability in a general way. They didn't elaborate, but I think time has come. And in nuclear weapon issue, we could talk about no first use. Because if you talk about the numbers, even if China increases number, as Pentagon has asserted, to 1,000 by 2030, still China's nuclear warheads is still much smaller than that of the United States. I mean, because the Chinese government would never say how many nuclear warheads we're going to have. So, but there is one, so China would never reach nuclear parity with the United States, but in no first use, China and the United States could discuss about it. Because even President Biden had some idea about this, and a long time ago, 700 American scientists and engineers, including 21 Nobel laureates, encouraged President Biden to adopt this policy of no first use. Then what is its implication for American allies? I know American allies are worried. Let's talk about ROK. If DPRK launch a nuclear attack on you, and you want Americans to protect you, no. The DPRK would commit a suicide because the Korean Peninsula is not big enough. The radioactivities will kill all of them before America use a nuclear weapon. So why should you worry about that? Thank you. Let me stop here.
Okay, Ambassador Ahn, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Well, Dr. Soya, I was listening to you, and then you said somebody suggested about the importance of respecting status quo. And then as a matter of fact, I just happened to mention about the importance of status quo. So in fact, it greatly encourages me that in the sense that at least Dr. Soya was listening to me. So thank you so much. Then having said that, I wish to make 2 points. My first point is about the importance of deterrence. And well, I was just listening to Mr. Joe Bo, and then he was saying Korean Peninsula is so small that were North Korea to use nuclear weapons, then in fact the whole Korean Peninsula would be affected by the nuclear fallout. So in fact, it doesn't make sense whether the United States sticks to no first use or not. But at the same time, I think that in fact is the crux of the matter, which is the importance of deterrence. And as my colleague Dr. Choi said, then as North Korean nuclear capability just keeps on getting stronger, then of course there is much concern going around in Korea. And then that concern is about the credibility of nuclear extended deterrence being offered by the United States. So that, in fact, is a very real issue that we are facing in Korea. So I'm listening to you, and then I think there is a certain good ground on which you are making that argument. But at the same time, I also understand why many of my compatriots, many South Koreans, they are concerned about the credibility of extended deterrence provided by the United States. So the reason why no first use is important for Korea is because we somehow are under the impression that that in fact it is very closely related with the strength of U.S. The commitment of U.S. extended deterrence. So that in fact is the relationship between two. But at the same time, on the same subject, that is to say about the importance of extended deterrence. Again, I was listening to you, Mr. Joe Bo, when you said, well, China at the end of the day, it doesn't have too much influence upon North Korea. That's something I often hear. But at the same time, of course, when it comes to economy, no country can survive for long without viable economy. And then that's what we have in North Korea today. I'm extremely concerned about the quality of economic standard that North Korea is maintaining for the time being. And then by any standard, then of course, North Korean economy is in fact far below what it used to have in 1990s. That in fact is amazing. And then that in fact is the reason why I said, well, early in 1990s, we had genuine opportunity for peace. And I'm sorry, after 30 years, that North Korea didn't took that opportunity. And then even today, I really hope that North Korea takes up that opportunity. But what I can assure you is, unless United States is firm in emphasizing once again about the strength of the deterrence, diplomacy doesn't have a chance. And then this is something which Mr. Biden says all the time, which is that in dealing with North Korean nuclear issue, we will try to deal with it with diplomacy and stern deterrence. That's an adjective he used. He always says stern deterrence. And then I think he's right on the point, in the sense that unless North Korea, in fact, is convinced about how firm United States is in offering extended deterrence to South Korea, then diplomacy with North Korea wouldn't work. My second point is a broader point, which is about the alliance system. And then, well, about the alliance system, then what I often hear from my Chinese colleague is, well, alliance system, that in fact is, in a sense, anachronistic system to maintain peace. That in fact is something, a legacy of the Cold War period. That's what I often hear from Chinese friends. But at the same time, let us just try to look at what is happening in Europe today. Why does Ukraine want to join NATO? Why does what Mr. Putin does in Eastern Ukraine? Why is it for the strengthening the alliance called NATO? And then why did all those countries, when I say all those countries, then Visegrad 3 countries, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, as well as 3 countries in the Baltics, and then Romania, Bulgaria, why did all of them choose to leave Warsaw Pact and join NATO? Well, because they find much, well, in fact, value in alliance system. So, well, as a matter of fact, you cannot convince NATO members, or you cannot convince Indo-Pacific allies of the United States that it's a legacy from Cold War. So long as they think it is necessary to maintain this alliance system, then they will try to maintain it. So instead of suggesting that alliance system is a legacy from the Cold War, which better be put to an end, I think what we should be doing instead of that would be to try to create an order in the Indo-Pacific as well as in Europe, which in fact would be conducive to convincing the members of the US alliance system that in fact it is becoming a legacy of the Cold War. And then if things have progressed in the right direction after the Cold War in 1990s, then after 30 years, we may have reached that stage. But unfortunately, as I said in my earlier intervention, I think the world went in very wrong direction in my mind. Thank you.
Okay, this session is essentially talking about problems, identifying problems in the region. And I think participants are doing excellent, jobs in stating somewhat different perspectives, which are in fact sources of a problem. And solutions are of course difficult, but we will perhaps tomorrow we'll talk about, the possible favorable sort of directions to go. But before that, this session is on identifying problems, and I think, and different views from different countries, I think, in a way symbolize why we are having difficulties. But this kind of discussion, I think, should be very, very important. Sorry, I'm beginning to speak as if the session would be ending, but we have one more hour. And now from the Japanese side, Ambassador Miyamoto would like to say a few words.
Let me speak in English. even though I spent my time in China much longer than in the United States. But when you are diplomatic circle, you have to speak in English. Anyway, I think the nuclear deterrence, strategic stability, these are essential issues we have to discuss today. So I refer some aspects of this nuclear deterrence and strategic stability. At a long time, I was engaged in this area, and I have still doubts about the policy of non-first use. What is the guarantee? How the world in reality can get non-first use commitment in real terms? How we can guarantee this commitment is a serious question arms controllers faced for a long time. But so the public opinion diplomacy, non-first use, very workable, in a way effective, particularly in a democratic society. The government promised non-first use, then government must abide by this commitment. So, but on the other side, in the real battlefield, how this principle be manipulated or used, a totally different story. So I'm not so much pay attention to this non-first use debate. Secondly, new balance of power in emerging in East Asia, it's, of course, we have to securely face this reality. But at the same time, I have to remind my Chinese friends that what is the cause of this new balance of power? Why we have to create this new balance of power? The reason is rise of China. This is a reality, and the Chinese friends strongly urge us to adjust ourselves, outsiders, to this new reality, namely a strong, militarily strong China. But you are forgetting one very important aspect. One action always invites reactions. What is happening right now in this area is a reaction from the death of members of this East Asian community. So what we have to do is China side, our side too, should pay more concern to the others' security concerns. We have to take care of others' security concerns. Namely, that leads to the establishment, a new mechanism or new order, whatever you call it, some mechanism that can take care of the security concerns of the members of this region. Finally, because China, US-China relations are so important, vital to the security and stability of this region, I have to say to my Chinese and American friends, you lost others' image totally. What I heard from the Washington and Beijing are not fit into my image of the United States and China. Beijing and Washington largely speaking out about others, but those images did not fit into my own images of the United States and China. That means the US and China must engage in more in-depth dialogue to find others. For example, Chinese friends said, US has a conspiracy to undermine Chinese Communist regime. I don't feel so. So Chinese side must explain why you believe in this theory. At the same time, the US side, China has a grand vision, 100 years of grand vision to establish China as the #1 in the world, overtaking the United States. But I don't see this 100 years grand plan of China. So what I see is such kind of the gaps of reality and images. This is a real cause of our problem. This is my view. So reminding my friends that the China-US relationships is in the real the turnout point. We have to pay more attention to see others in more calmly and objectively. Thank you.
Thank you. I think when Ambassador Miyamoto talked about the importance of putting your feet in others' shoes, between US and China, that reminded me of my somewhat long-term discussion of the importance of, this is in the context of Japan and South Korea relations, the importance of empathy, which should come before trying to build trust. I mean, we often talk about trust, but without empathy, we cannot reach that stage. And that is what is terribly lacking, between Japan and South Korea in some corners of both politics. And I think the same could apply to the US-China relations. But of course, the question is, if US and China, if there is a chance for US and China to engage in such dialogue, or at least start a dialogue and then move toward trying to feel some empathy toward each other. And if that is done, I think that is a great start for the new kind of road to turn around 30 years history of things going in the wrong directions. And so in that sense as well, I think US-China relationship holds the key. And I welcome your comments on this, and particularly from the US and Japan side, US and Chinese side. And one question to Ambassador Miyamoto is, one thing which struck me looking at these kind of risk assessments, the percentage or points in all the 4 countries regarding relations between Japan and China is very low, relatively low. So people are not worried about relations between Japan and China. And Japan has good relations with the US. So Ambassador Miyamoto, do you think Japan would be able to serve as a sort of, go-between? I mean, in this, in your expose of importance of US and China trying to do something about misperceptions of each other. And if there is a good mediator, of course, things could be better. And if I may go a step further, if Japan and South Korea cooperate in this sort of mediating role between US and China, that could be ideal, but we may be too small compared to them. But just one point I wanted to raise for discussions. And if I may, Admiral Koda, I was struck by your opening point about sort of analogy between what's going on in Europe today and what is unfolding in our region. And question is very simple. You said, Mr. Putin, okay, let me switch to Japanese because he spoke in Japanese about this point.
Admiral Koda, earlier on you said that Putin doesn't intend to make any compromise, and this won't change. The military power is backing this up, but when it comes to NATO, they are continuing their traditional way, centering around diplomacy, and maybe this can be replicated in Asia. Then China, I think you said that doesn't intend to budge, compromise, and the response by the US side basically is diplomacy. Well, if this is the analogy that you are referring to, now here comes my question. Well, there's a recent US Indo-Pacific strategy. Now that's to deepen the alliance with the allies and with a multilateral diplomatic framework. This is to take on the Chinese challenge. That's the way I interpret the document. Now, in your understanding, and also what is your interpretation about this? So I would like to ask you, Admiral Koda, to start the discussion on this aspect.
Thank you very much, Professor Soya. And exactly what's happening now in Europe is exactly Mr. Soya said in English. And I think, my short comment at the beginning was properly translated in English. So, of course, there are some differences between Ukraine and Indo-Pacific, especially Taiwan. But one thing that is common is the objective. Xi Jinping has no intent to change his determination to unify China by all means at any cost, some point in the future. Maybe this year, or perhaps 3 years later, or often said 2027, or by 2049. The key thing is Xi Jinping or his successor, Chinese leader, I believe they maintain this objective. So this is one thing in common with the Putin. But at the same time, there are some differences. For example, in the Indo-Pacific theater is the maritime theater. So even China really wants to use military as a supporting elements of Chinese diplomacy to unify China. But naval powers with US and Japan, and perhaps supported by Australia, would be much stronger. That China can't ignore, even 20 years from now. That is a point Beijing knows very well. So for China, especially making a decision to when they really decide to use military power as a backup of the diplomacy, when to use military will be very difficult decision. Because if they make a mistake in decision making, the result would be devastating. That means the failure of the Beijing's policy. So this is the point, or complicated point of the Taiwan issue. But key point is, if allied nations, especially US and Japan, fail to integrate our efforts, both in diplomacy and military, China would take an advantage of misalignment of our efforts. That would be an advantage. And so, there are similarities and dissimilarity in Asia. But we have to take some lessons from what's happening now in Ukraine. But anyway, President Putin clearly has no intent to make a succession or compromise in terms of the territorial expansion or expanding his sphere of influences. So what I'm saying here is, we have to watch what's happening in Ukraine very carefully and try to draw out or depict as many precious lessons as possible in similar area and dissimilar areas. And we should be wise enough, especially to reinforce our disadvantages. And lastly, I'm not saying to go to war with China now or several years from now. But key thing is a well-prepared posture will deter Beijing's adventurism. So that is the role of the military, to support diplomacy. In order for both nations, China and the US, or China and US and Japan, to really prevent the conflicts, military conflicts from happening, our preparedness, or showing our preparedness to Beijing will be a key to deter and give our diplomats a large area to discuss in peaceful environment. This is what I really wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think it should be fair to give the floor to participants from China. And before that, I'd like to intrude one point before giving chances for the Chinese to say what they want to say. One reason that some of us tend to believe that Chinese posture, particularly with respect to these kind of hot so-called flashpoints, will be uncompromising, is the definition of the nature of the issue. That is, Taiwan, South China Sea, and Senkaku for us. Chinese basic starting point is those are your territories, by definition, and I would believe you can never give up that starting sort of definition of the issue. And so my question is, if that is correct, then how would that be sort of reconciled with efforts to sort of look for status quo as a compromise, or sort of a new balance of power, between the US and China, and so forth. I think that is a very difficult point if we try to do something about this. And if I may, I think that is one critical source of difficulty that we are facing, and the Chinese may have different views. So, Dr. Zhang, please.
I'd like to say something about the Taiwan issue. Tomorrow, I will have a speech, but tomorrow's session will be a closed-door discussion. So I think I have to say something to give a reply to Admiral's speech. He said that Xi Jinping's policy is to unify China by force. It's totally wrong. It's not the policy of China. At the end of last year, Xi Jinping have a visual talk with President Biden. When they talk about the Taiwan issue, Xi Jinping said three points. The first is the whole people in China hope to realize the comprehensive unification. This is the goal. Secondly, we have the biggest determination and sincerity to realize the reunification peacefully. You should note this, very, very important. Thirdly, he said, but if Taiwan independent forces and if separation forces force China to do something, maybe finally we have to take some strong measures to deal with that. So here we can talk about what is the status quo. Someone said it's very, very important. I agree. When we meet a very dangerous situation, the most important thing maybe the first step is to keep status quo. Then we can try our best to find a way to resolve the problem. For Taiwan issue, what is the status quo? For so many years, most of people, including United States, Japan, South Korea, almost all the countries believe and admit there is only one China. This is the status quo. And both Taiwan and the mainland belong to the one China. Yeah, of course, China also believe that the Republic of China is the only legitimate representative of China. So anyway, this is the status quo. I still remember between since 2008 to 2016, when the mainland and Taiwan reach develop their relations on the basis of 1992 consensus. Very good development. And there is a trend of peaceful development in the Taiwan Strait. So at that time, the American colleagues even don't want to talk with us about Taiwan issue. In this track 2 dialogue, in the past, we have a lot of talk about the Taiwan issue, but at that time they said, no any problem. We don't need to talk about the Taiwan issue. But since 2016, Tsai Ing-wen became the so-called new president. They give up, they refuse the 92 consensus. So he violated the status quo. And in this situation, mainland has to do something to keep the status quo. So I really hope the Japanese admiral to know who is the troublemaker, who violate the status quo. So if United States, Japan really hope to keep the status quo in Taiwan Strait, the most important thing is don't give any wrong message to Tsai Ing-wen administration. In this way, China will have more confidence to realize the peaceful reunification.
Well, I cannot resist my temptation. I think that point of the Japanese and the U.S. sides, respecting the so-called principle of one China and objecting Taiwan's outright move towards so-called independence. I think those messages are very clearly, given to the Taiwanese side. And I think they are playing their game on the basis of that, I think, basis of this issue. And so Japan, US officially, diplomatically have already, agreed that, one China principle is there, and there is no sort of sentiments to strong incentive to support so-called Taiwan's move toward independence. And I think I said officially and diplomatically. In private conversations, people may say all kinds of things out of their emotions and so forth. But at I think governmental level, I think that basic point is still maintained. That's my take of it. But some people may have different perceptions. But Professor Jiajinko, yeah, thank you for waiting.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful discussion. I want to make 3 brief points. One is we talked a lot about who is to blame, China, the US, and so on and so forth. I think it's a chicken and egg problem. I think we all think that we are reacting to the other side's provocations. But of course, on specific issues, I think there are people who initiated the action and reaction process. So probably we need to look at the reasons at a more general level that lead us to such kind of a process. For example, to what extent we ignore each other as positive signals. It's very interesting, at the beginning of the Biden administration, the Chinese leaders tried to send out some signals to the US, but then these signals were perceived as China's shifting blame of the deterioration of China-US relations to the US side. Actually, the Chinese government was saying that during the Trump administration we had some problems. So that, but it's let's make a new start. But then the message was totally mixed. The second issue is about the Diaoyu Island or Senkaku Island problem. I think the two countries have different views. They all have some facts. This is a typical territorial dispute with sophisticated and highly politically charged background. So we cannot resolve it in the short run. If we cannot resolve it, we should keep it managed peacefully, rather than let this issue define our broader relationship. The third issue is Taiwan. I think China's policy of peaceful unification has not changed, as Professor Zhang Tousheng said. But from the Chinese perspective, Taiwan has not split away from China in a territorial or sovereignty sense. Okay, China has this anti-secession law, which means that Taiwan is still part of China in a territorial sovereignty sense, but China is opposed to Taiwan's separation from China. So as long as China believes that Taiwan is part of China, the Taiwan problem is a domestic political issue. Okay? It doesn't have to be resolved by force and in a great hurry. But the problem is, from the Chinese perspective, Taiwan is moving away from China in the territorial sovereignty sense, with the backing of the US in recent years, especially since DPP came back to power. That, to some extent, we explain why we have this chain reaction between Taiwan, the Chinese mainland, and the US, which led to the current state of tension and crisis to some extent. What needs to be done is to reassure China that Taiwan is not going to become independent In other words, to give China the hope that it can achieve political reunification through peaceful means. Okay. But we need the U.S. And other countries to assure us if the U.S. and other countries want China to stick to the policy of peaceful reunification. Okay. So this is the problem we are facing at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mark Montgomery has joined us in this session, and he has raised his hand. Mr. Montgomery, please.
Thank you. Before I say my major point, I must just respond to the last thing. And I think that the United States would be well positioned to work with China if you had done better efforts in your movements in Hong Kong. But I mean, you truly can't expect us to support that sort of integration effort in Taiwan. And if I have to explain what our problems are with that, it would be a very long meeting. So I'll just move on. I am concerned, however, about the impact of Russia and Ukraine. I think it's further distracting the United States from our efforts to focus on the Pacific. And I think that will be very dangerous because it will lead to a mismatch in our rhetoric and our posture. Our rhetoric is that we support the administrative sovereignty of Japanese islands. We support the free and open nature of the South China Sea. We support. We're unwilling to allow Taiwan to be coerced into any solution, but we are definitely mismatching our posture and effort in the Pacific with our rhetoric. We speak of these things, but we don't act in an aggressive way, in a way that demonstrates our commitment to these principles. And this goes all the way back to the 2012 pivot to the Pacific. And we've been distracted in the Middle East. Now we're distracted in Europe. This is actually very dangerous because I think at our core, we are a Pacific nation. We are committed to our allies like South Korea and Japan. We are a strong supporter of beleaguered democracies like Israel and Taiwan. And if that is our true principles and our posture doesn't follow, then we create confusing expectations in Chinese minds. So I would say very specifically, it is a serious error to say, oh, the Trump administration believed this, and that was the problem. The Trump administration and the Biden administration generally believe the same things about China. And to try to dissimulate these is, I get that the personality of delivery and the discipline of the executive branch are much different, but to try to explain this away, the change in American intent away as part of a failed Trump policy or a come and gone Trump policy is a real error. This is a significant amount of the American political decision-making class, the people who think about these issues, are very consistent over the last 3 or 4 years about how the United States should approach its relationship with China. So I hope there isn't a distraction in Europe. This idea that somehow it was Trump that was focused on China, on competition with China and not others. I hope this doesn't create a disconcerting expectation mismatch in China where you feel that the United States is in a position other than very forcefully and competitively saying that our vision of a free and open Pacific and our vision of democracy and free market economies is not one that we would like to see broadly throughout North and Southeast Asia. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I see no hands. Am I right? Oh, okay. Just this. So from Korean side, Brigadier General. How do I pronounce it? This is in English. H-E-O. How? Hon? Ho?
Yeah, Ho.
General Ho. Yes.
Yeah,
Please.
Retired Brigadier General. Nice to see all of you. And then we discussed about the nuclear deterrence before, but I want to add one more thought about on that issue. The U.S. nuclear deterrence is really important for the for deterrence toward maybe the nuclear powered country, but it's more important for the non-nuclear states for the deterrence, especially such as South Korea and Japan. And then the credibility of the commitment should be based on the will and the capability. The United States has capabilities, enough capabilities based on the nuclear triad. But as you know, between the foreign policy, the will shows it based on the was. It means the will be based on the specific words and policy. From that point of view, the no force use is very important for these countries. And today's discussion is more toward to the discussion between China and United States. Therefore, based on today's the topic, I want to introduce my thought about the South Korea's threat perception and approach regarding North Korean issue and Taiwan together. As for South Korea, the biggest threat issue has been North Korea since the Korean War in 1950. Multiple threats from North Korea, conventional and unconventional, are and will be the most serious security issue that will threaten the lifeline and future of this country and beyond. The improvement of the deterioration of the relationship between South and North and NK issue can have impact from each South Korean government's North Korea policy. But I think the security environment surrounding the Korean Peninsula, especially the relationship between the US and China, is more important. Good relationship between the US and China can make favorable environment to improve North Korean issue, and we can find out very effective NK policy options using sticks and or carrots. But the biggest geopolitical element surrounding this peninsula is the deterioration of that relationship. Therefore, it will continually difficult to achieve international cooperation to solve North Korea issue. And I anticipate that new South Korean government will have a difficulty to make headway for peaceful situation on the peninsula in the near future without any change of the relationship between these two big countries. And the South Korea's policy toward the Taiwan issue have some level of difference comparing to the policies of the US and Japan and China. It's not because the Taiwan issue doesn't have much impact to the security of the peninsula. It is a very important issue, but each country has different security priority. We could find out this feature at the survey. From the South Korean perspective, the shift of neighboring countries' international policy focus from North Korea to the Taiwan issue means more or less attention to the Korean Peninsula. And this change can give incentive to the North Korean regime to act more violently in order to draw attention to it. And the change of North Korean action will deteriorate the security situation on the peninsula and beyond. That is all I have.
Thank you. Well, before giving floor to Dr. Chegang, allow me to raise one point. Sorry, this is a sort of devil's advocate kind of point in which I do not necessarily believe in. How real is threat coming from North Korea nuclear developments. Oh, what's the nature of threat? The threat is about the defending the nuclear attacks against South Korea, or is it rather more sort of diplomatic? I mean, moving North Korea more toward the sort of very stubborn position not to talk easily, and I mean with South Korea and others. And in all countries, 4 countries, I mean, the North Korea nuclear program is really high in the points, and and it has become very common to talk about it. I mean, among security experts. But what is actually the real nature of this threat? Military, diplomatic, or political, or defense of your territory, or what? That's also, if Dr. Chega, if you could refer to this a bit in your remarks.
Okay, 2 points. One, I think North Korean nuclear threat is very serious and clear, because actually North Korea can use nuclear weapons as a deterrent measures, and also that it will enable North Korea to use their conventional forces in a various way. So actually North Korea will be in a better position to use various military options against South Korea. For example, if they successfully develop ICBM, they will be in a position to force the United States from sending their troops, augmentation forces, or maybe they will be in a position to control the escalation ladder. So I think a very serious threat to South Korea. And also maybe because actually North Korea doesn't care much about the whole population. They may care about let's say, 100,000, the core elites groups which support the Kim Jong-un regime. So survival of the whole regime is depending on those small size of people, not whole population. So maybe at the end of the day, they can use nuclear weapons in a suicidal way, but they don't care about. That's my own assessment. The point I like to raise here before I leave, because actually I have to go right now. One is like the mismatch between what China says and what China does over Taiwan Strait. Why it says peaceful unification or peaceful resolution of dispute, why there has been a sharp increase of military maneuver during the past whole year over the Taiwan Strait. Actually, the last, I think maybe November was the month that actually they intruded into the air defense identification zone with, I think, 50 aircraft. So I don't think that's a sign of the determination to solve the Taiwan Strait issue. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining. Well, the Ambassador Miyamoto would like to say a few words, and I think we are getting into the end of the session to wrap up things. And so rather than myself trying to do impossible job of summarizing all the points, I would like to give floor to Kudo-san at the end and to have some concluding remarks. So before that, Ambassador Miyamoto.
Thank you very much for giving me the third time to speak out. This is really a privilege. Thank you very much. I think that I fully support the approach by the Professor Jia Qingguo of China. We need a diplomatic approach to the solution of the problems or disputes, whatever name it. We need diplomatic solutions. He raised a very good example about China. International community, particularly East Asian community, must give assurance to China that Taiwan will not go into independence. Secondly, he referred to the Senkaku, Diaoyuda Islands issues. We should find out some diplomatic solution to the question. That is, I fully agree with this argument. Simultaneously, in order to reach these diplomatic solutions, again, first I said, trust and confidence becomes more important. Without enough trust and confidence, very difficult to reach this kind of diplomatic solutions. Secondly, the Japan and South Korea can play a very important role in mediating into the US-China relationships. First, when we saw the first trilateral meeting between Japan, China, and Korea, I was so excited. Finally, this bilateral, tough, difficult situations be salvaged by this triangular summit meeting. Two are quarreling, third is calm and intervene. Then situation must be resolved. But trilateral meeting summits between Japan, China, Korea didn't work well right now. So why not Japan and South Korea together join with the US-China relationships becomes four, I think much better. Particularly, we are so seriously concerned about the situations. We think in a very seriously how this crisis be managed and saved. So we are entitled, Japan, South Korea, to go into these discussions and tell my Chinese and American friends what they are wrong, what are the others wrong, you are right. This kind of judgment and explanation, why we think so, can be enhanced the dialogue between China and the United States. So Japan and South Korea can play a very significant role in this Japan, China, US bilateral relationships. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Miyamoto. I think time to wrap up things, but I really appreciate. Ambassador Russell, would you like to say a few words? Yeah.
Yes, if I may,
Please.
even though I've also spoken
Yes.
more than once. You asked three questions, and I'd like to respond briefly to each of them. Is there hope for building empathy between the US and China, you asked? I think yes, but as Ambassador Miyamoto pointed out, trust is a precondition for diplomatic solutions, for progress. And as the saying goes, trust is something that is built in drops, but lost in buckets. And the US and China have lost trust in each other in buckets, and it will be extremely challenging to drop by drop try to rebuild that. Can Japan and Korea mediate between the US and China? I think absolutely the answer is no. Cannot mediate between. No, it's rare for any country that hasn't been defeated in war to agree to that kind of mediation. But I love Ambassador Miyamoto's idea of a new quad that includes the US and China, Japan and Korea. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think that the US and China both benefit greatly from listening carefully to what two important neighbors have to say. Your last question was about what is this North Korea threat after all? And I just mentioned four aspects of it. First, as we heard earlier from Professor Jay, the extortion and blackmail, which we have been dealing with, is a real risk. Second, for North Korea to successfully defy the UN Security Council and obtain a normal nuclear status, a recognized status as a nuclear weapons state outside of the NPT, to do that with impunity, basically guarantees that other countries will follow suit sooner, if not later. The third risk is proliferation of nuclear weapons and nuclear materials. The North Koreans are hungry, they need money, they've threatened to proliferate in the past, and they could very well in the future. And then there's the actual use of nuclear weapons. They're developing smaller tactical nuclear weapons, it is not hard to imagine a North Korean leader deciding to launch an attack, nuclear attack against Japan. And it's also possible to imagine either an accidental launch or going out in a blaze of glory. So I don't think the North Korean threat is anything that we can be complacent about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Russell. I'm glad that I gave you the opportunity to say, particularly the first point, and Japan and South Korea cannot really mediate. I think that is very correct. But the sort of hidden agenda that Kudo-san had in advancing this new Quad framework was or is that this would inevitably lead Japan and South Korea to think sort of on the same sort of footing. I mean, to find out that we are on the same boat and between US and China. And I think structurally that is inevitable. And I think Ambassador Miyamoto's point and Mr. Russell's point about this new Quad, I think this framework, importance of this framework, one sort of agenda that Kudo-san had in formulating this new Quad, I think was exactly about Japan and South Korea, and which is of course a missing link, and that is a sort of huge opportunity cost, I would argue, in bringing about sort of stable, Northeast Asia. But anyway, so Kudo-san will have final words to conclude the session.
はい、ちょっと今日は
Well,
インターネットを通じてかなり多くの人がこの議
through
論
internet, many persons in audience are watching this event today. So I would like to say about how those persons in audience perceived this discussion today. Well, the discussion that we had today seemed to me very different from the discussion that we had last year. And I am concerned about that. Last year, we discussed saying that we should no longer continue to argue for individual national interests, and instead we should pursue, well, first identify the shared interest of this region as a whole and to pursue it. We discussed that way last year. And then as Professor Soya said, from the viewpoint of Quad, our discussion last year was not saying that the Quad's highest priority is to contend against China. It wasn't, because potentially that could be a framework in which China join in the future. And then Mr. Admiral Koda and the other former SDF officials talked in that way as well. There is a freedom of individual nations in this region, and then we saw last year an ample possibility for them to pursue shared interests. However, today it seems that hope is much lower today than last year, but we have to check and confirm that yesterday, tomorrow in our discussion. But between the US-China relationship, as far as in this relationship is concerned, a strategic dialogue needs to happen as soon as possible, because that not only it is essential to have that dialogue between US-China in order to deal with the structural issues which have a potential to bring about real dangers. So even we can talk about the trust, the confidence, and lack of distrust should be happening between US and China. We talked about that today. And then position of Japan and South Korea has some different meanings from that perspective, because as a shared interest of the region, there are economic interests as well. And then US-China tension may potentially bring about a lethal division to the regional economic shared interests. But in Japan, no one has determined to say that the US-China division tension will bring about such an economic division in the region. Well, it is not really officially established in terms of economic cooperation in this region, but Japan is determined to say that the regional economic prosperity as a shared interest cannot be subject to a concession or compromise. So, as Professor Sawyer rightly pointed out, that involvement of Japan, Korea from that perspective becomes very important. And not only Japan and South Korea, but including with other industrialized countries, we need to have a broad and global perspective so that we will cooperate with all the industrialized countries on the global basis, because freedom-based and free market is established in Northeast Asia, and then not only a China Sea, South China Sea or East Sea, China Sea issues, but all these issues need to be peacefully resolved. So with this perception of the situation and the challenges, we are going to discuss about the Taiwan's crisis tomorrow and then how to manage the security risk in Northeast Asia. It will not our first discussion. We have been discussing these topics over many, many years, and we achieved some consensus last year. Have those consensus disappeared over the last 12 months? Is that the case? Well, it is true that the dialogue is not enough, and then we should send many more messages to Chinese government, but we, in order to generate a current as one of the civil society channel, we should endeavor to have a good discussion tomorrow. Well, today, this is a public session, so there are many people in the audience, but tomorrow we will have a closed session. So I expect to have a heated discussion, but then I am determined to achieve a consensus amongst ourselves, and we will report the outcome of tomorrow's discussion in the accurate way.
So please join us tomorrow. So I think I was able to convey my determination. Maybe it didn't summarize the session fully, but that's my determination. Well, actually, I think we had an honest discussion today already, and I think we've achieved our goals. That is to identify what are the issues, how are they issues. I think those have become clearer through our discussion today. So how is Geno NPO going to summarize that? How is it going to publicize that on its website? I'm very looking forward to that. So I'm going to unilaterally declare that this session was a great success.
Thank you, everybody, for joining and engaging in very frank and I think eventually productive discussions. So I've declared the session is closed, and thank you again. And have a good time, and please come back tomorrow for further discussions.